latest episode of the Lisa Pezik Show. So honored today to have a fellow podcaster on with me, Justin Lewis, who runs the Hard Thing podcast. We're going to talk today about how do we overcome hard things? How do we navigate when we know something difficult is coming up in life, or hello 2020, when every day you don't even know what is going to be thrown at you and what hard thing is going to fall into your lap. So, Justin, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to be here and excited to share this message.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive into just the wealth of knowledge that you have from constantly having this conversation with people. So let me tell them about you. So Justin Lewis is a full-time SEO specialist, and he also hosts the Hard Thing podcast. He connects with high-performing individuals to work with them to extract out the deep principles of living a fulfilled life and reaching your goals by talking about doing hard things. He also puts himself into hard things with his co-host, Ty Crockett, in order to give his audience examples of what it looks like to do hard things. So listeners, if you haven't got it yet, it's all about doing the hard things. So Justin, how did this idea to even have this podcast come about for you and your buddy Ty?
Sure. So originally it was just me. I actually just added the co-host a couple months ago, but it was about June 2019. I love podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts for years and years now. I actually started a previous podcast that was kind of it was like it was more of a side project, but a complete failure. And, that's in the past. But I started thinking about the message I wanted to help people with. And there were podcasts that I really enjoyed and podcasts that I felt that helped me. And I started thinking about what are the major things that I've struggled with most of my life. And the podcast idea really came from two specific avenues, you could say. All growing up, I'm a huge nerd, by the way. I love nerdy things. I love movies, books, all that jazz.
I love it.
And especially Star Wars. And I remember watching these movies and going into the movie theaters and kind of coming out, and maybe I'm just uber emotional or whatnot, but I would kind of come out and have this like weird withdrawal from this fantastical world that I got caught up in while you're watching. And I see you nodding your head, so you probably understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept on feeling sad about my life and feeling like, well, I'm not like Batman, or I'm not like Luke Skywalker. I'm not all of these heroes, even like real heroes, like on Braveheart or other movies like that. I realized that I'm not like these people, and I want to be like them. I don't want to be just some back character, like what's the difference between me and them? What makes, me one of the actual characters in the movie rather than one of the people that you just see in the background. So that was the first kind of experience, you could say. And then the second one comes from actually my religion. And I might have told you this, it might have been someone else, but I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And not to go too much into that, but we believe in the Book of Mormon, which is similar to the Bible. We also believe in the Bible, but in the Book of Mormon, there's a story of a father who's commanded by God to leave this grand city. And after leaving and taking his family, God is like, hey, I need you to send your sons back all that long distance and go get a book, basically, right? Very, and not just a book, but like a book from a really wicked rich man who's probably going to kill your sons. That's what I need you to do. And so he has these 4 sons, older sons, he tells them, and they're not happy. And then he tells his youngest son, and this is really what keyed me off. And the youngest son, after learning what he needed to do, the father says, I told your older brothers, and they said it was a hard thing to do, that I've required them. And the youngest son actually, his response is basically like, yeah, it's a hard thing, but we're going to get it done anyways. Like, bring it on, kind of, And as you follow their trajectories throughout their life, it's fascinating how stark the difference between the two is. And that keyed me off, and I started looking for that same pattern in other people's lives. Because again, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I hear a lot of high-performing individuals, and I often watch and see how these individuals have this mindset of the hard thing is not going to stop me. I'm going to overcome it. I'm going to get on the other side of it. I'm going to do what it takes, do what I need to in order to reach that goal. And so those are the two things that really inspired me to start doing this and having these conversations with people.
I love that. And I love that awareness that you had from being a spectator to actually being a player. Like the spectator, we consume. We watch the movie, we read the book, we go to the play, we listen to the music, we see the art. The player, the contributor, is the person that is in the movie, that creates the music and the art. And you went, wait a second, I don't want to just consume this and be the spectator. I want to be the hero of the story, or I want to be the underdog, or I want to contribute and put myself in that narrative. And that's such a cool flip because, you know, probably not the people that you have on your show, because you have high performing achievers that are doing good things in the world. So many people are on autopilot. So many people are not doing the hard thing because they think it's too hard, or they don't have the confidence in themselves, or all those demons of, but what if someone laughs at me? What if I fail? What if I lose money? Like all those fears that may never come true, people lead with that and they remain the spectator. They remain the consumer instead of the contributor. And I think that's just such a cool flip that you were like, what's my part? What's my piece? How do I do that? And I love that a podcast was born out of that. And I love that story. It made me laugh when you said the youngest son was the one that was like, yeah, bring it on. Because it's always like, I'm the baby of the family. I don't know if you are, but it's always like us rogue ones, you know, we're the ones that have no fear. And, you know, maybe because we've seen older siblings, you know, do hard things or not do hard things. I always find that so interesting that, like, you know, there's always one in the family, or there's always someone that breaks the mold, breaks the legacy, or says, yeah, let's, you know, the rally and says, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So I love that so much. And thank you for, I think when I was on your podcast, there was no tie. It was just you. So, yeah. So neat. So what would you say if, let's just talk about the climate now, because I think 2020 has been, as we're filming this right now, a lot of unexpected hard things. There's that difference between, okay, I know this is going to suck. I know this is going to be hard. I'm going to do it. What do the guests say about the things that they don't expect to be, those unexpected bumps and bruises? Is there any of their like fallback tactics that they go to no matter what? Or how do we navigate when we don't know what the heck is coming at us?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And honestly, one of the interesting things, so what I did is I actually looked, because on all my podcasts, as you know, I ask all my guests, what's the hardest thing you've ever done, right?
Yeah.
And I went back and listened and wrote down all the things, or at least at the beginning I didn't do that, but all of the times that they answer that question. And for most of the guests, the hard things often do bring some sort of unknown or some sort of surprise. And it's kind of funny because in a way, the surprise doesn't really define them, or if that makes sense. For example, one of my guests, his name is Sean Lee. He's actually a friend of mine. He was diagnosed with cancer when he was, I believe, in high school. And no, it was a couple years after high school. Anyways, but that doesn't define him. So one thing I want the listeners to understand is that with COVID-19 and the pandemic, civil unrest, job loss, basically fill in the blank, you know, it's an ad lib for tragedy this year. That's not what defines you. The hard thing doesn't define you. It's what you've done despite the hard thing. And so I've looked, and a lot of my guests kind of keep a long-term perspective. Some of their hard things are divorce or failure, not going exactly where they wanted to be, but that was past tense, their hard thing. That's not what they're doing right now. And so I guess the main thing I'd really like the audience to know is that it's not over till it's over, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Yeah. It's like that phrase where they say, this too shall pass.
Exactly.
And I heard a mentor say, no, it's this past. When
Yeah.
you say this too shall pass, it means you're still living it. You're still reliving it. You're still in it. As opposed to that past. That's done. I learned from it, or I made my way through it. And let's now focus on where I'm at now. And I love that flip that you said it's not the hard thing that defines you. It's what you did despite that, or in spite of that, what you got out of it. And I've seen a lot of stuff on social media where people are like, let's just, throw up the tree and take a shot and have the ball drop and just forget 2020 and like write it off.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, oh my God, if you're alive in 2020, if your business is still, if you still have a job, if you have your health, if you have a roof over your head, you got food on your table, like, we should be celebrating the hell out of the fact that we're here and we survived. Because, you think about, how do we endure hard things? How do we build endurance? It's through enduring.
Exactly.
Think of how resilient we are, and how resilient. Like, I've got a little one. Do you have kiddos yet? Yes.
I don't have kids yet. Not yet. I have a puppy, but it's a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, but think of how resilient your marriage is. I think about how resilient, my little guy, my 6-year-old is. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, you're right, how you said, fill in the blank of tragedy. Absolutely. That's a reality. But look at how much resilience we built, and how much, for me, it's been like problem solving. Like, at first I was kind of ticked off that I had to figure all these things out and like navigate, everything. Yeah. And now I'm like, dang, like, I'm resourceful.
Yeah.
Like, giving yourself that credit that, it wasn't the hard thing. It was how you handled it.
Exactly. And it's actually funny. I love that. It's funny that you bring up endurance, because in looking at all of the guests, and I tried to look for attributes or things about the guests themselves that made it so they could overcome the average, or overcome obstacles. Yeah. I often say overcome average. But the number one thing that I found was their ability to endure pain of some shape or form. And so I think what you said there about it, just enduring, that is the number one thing that's going to help you get through hard things. Being able to take pain, mental pain, physical pain, social pain, spiritual pain, financial pain, being able to take that longer than the person next to you, that's going to set you apart from them.
Yeah. How many guests we talking? Like, how many episodes are you in, or how many guests have you had?
Yesterday I released my 74th episode of the Monday show, which is when I release guest interviews. I don't think it's 74 because there was a spell there where I didn't have very many guests. I mean, when you start off podcasts, that's kind of what happens. Yeah. So my guess is anywhere around 60 to probably around 60 is what we're talking, at least right now.
That's amazing. And do you find, are people coming to you on your podcast resolved? Like, are they ready to talk about these hard things, or do you have to pull it out of them sometimes because they're reluctant to share?
Most of them are totally fine to talk about them, which is kind of nice. I haven't had a moment to really ask a question and then I guess say I'm not comfortable answering that. Before the shows, I do try and say like, hey, like, is there anything you don't want me to talk about? And they let me know. But as far as being resolved, in fact, there was one guest I had. He's a police officer from Illinois, I believe. He has cancer as well, but he hasn't been, I don't know what the word is. He hasn't been in remission
Yeah.
He's still fighting it, but he came on the show and he's like, yeah. And, based on what the docs have told me, I'm probably going to die in a couple of years. But he was just trying to make the best of it. And that was one example, of someone who is in a hard thing that they might not get out of alive, but they're going forward with a really nice attitude. And so I would just give that example to your listeners and say, hey, if COVID-19 or 2020 isn't rubbing you the right way, just make it through and keep your attitude great. And if you don't make it through, you'll probably be in a better place than the rest of us.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot about in my industry how, I help a lot of like health and fitness coaches,
Mhm.
and they're always like, but I'm still on my journey, or like, sales coaches or business coaches or therapists or, marriage counselors that are still working on their own marriage, and they're like,
Right.
but I'm not there yet. And I'm like, what's there yet? Like
Yeah.
there is no
Yeah.
perfection standard that once you reach this point, now you're good enough, or now you're
Yeah.
smart enough or qualified enough. I always think you only have to be like one step in front of someone to offer your hand and say, hey, come
Right.
this way instead of this way, right? And
Right.
it's just, I really think there's a humility and a vulnerability when people are willing to share honestly and truly what's going on and where they're at. So
Yeah.
I'm going to flip the question on you then.
Yeah.
That you asked me when I was on your podcast, and you get to ask everyone, what is the hardest thing you've ever had to endure?
You're the first person that has asked me this question.
Is
I've
that
actually,
okay?
yeah, it's totally fine.
Okay, cool.
I've actually kind of been secretly dreading uh, this question just because, it's hard to answer. It's like asking the question and answering it is a hard thing in and of itself. But luckily I did think about it. I'd say, and I know this question is probably, or this answer is probably kind of a cop out. But I'm going to give two answers. One, uh, I've done a lot of different hard things, at least hard things for me. So it's kind of hard for me to, prop one up and say this is the overall hardest thing. But I think the overall hardest thing, primarily because of the duration, has been learning how to, and you'll probably laugh because I mean you're married, so you've gone through this, but learning how to take two separate lives, two separate people who have been apart for most of their lives up until this point, and then kind of smack them together like two comets in space and hopefully make some sort of habitable planet where you can raise a family. And I'm talking about marriage, of course.
Yeah.
And just take all the baggage and all of the negative things that you're bringing to the relationship, and because you didn't sort it out before, but try and sort it out together in a way that still keeps both of you alive and both of you loving each other. That's been very challenging, and it's probably my favorite hardest thing too, because it's the most rewarding thing. Because every day I get to look at my wife and be like, you know what, like I choose this every single day, and I'm happy to, and it makes me be a better man, and it makes me happy and gives me more fulfillment. So that's my answer.
I love that. Commitment is such a huge gut check,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you're dating someone and you're not that serious, or you're dating multiple people and you got options,
Mm-hmm.
like when you take a vow and you get married and you're like in the house with that person, that you're waking up every day,
Yeah.
putting on the coffee and staring at each other, when you don't have a lot of options, you're like, this is important to me. And you're right. I remember when my husband and I first got married, we lived together. So I was from the US and he was from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And we had like a 2-year engagement because I had moved up here. So we spent like 2 years, living together before we actually got married. So for me, like making it to the wedding was like everyone always says the first year of marriage, if you can survive the first
Right.
year. For us, it was like that first 2 years
Mm-hmm.
where we were like all up in each other's stuff, living together. That I get why people say, because the old school, you didn't live together, or
Right,
depending
right.
on what you believe, right? Maybe still now you don't live together yet, but
Right.
we had lived together before we got married. And yeah, it was like, it was I remember like an ex-boyfriend saying to me, yeah, like when you get married, like you see that lamp over there, like that's not your lamp, that's our lamp. And I was like, what? Like in my early 20s, I was like, no, that's my lamp, right? Like, that's my
Yeah.
food in the fridge,
Right.
And it's
Right.
like, no. So you're right. It's like you bring together your pasts, you bring together your families, you bring
Mm-hmm.
together your stuff, it really is that union.
Yeah.
And I just love that's the hardest yet most beautiful thing, because when it's hard, it means you're being real,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
couples that say we never fight. I'm like, you ain't talking the truth in your house, right?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
hard
That's
me
so true.
and hard means you care.
Yeah.
Like when you're willing to have those kinds of discussions, it's because you don't have another option, because you're not going, you know what? Let's talk about kids.
Right.
We don't need to talk about that. If I want to have kids and they don't, we'll just divorce. And like, you're having these, whatever conversation that is, whether it's kids or jobs or, pets or whatever it is, money, things. You're having those hard conversations because it matters, because
Yeah.
you're in it. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that so much. I
Yeah.
love that so much.
I'm
Was there anything that has a guest ever stumped you? Like, have they ever started to talk about a hard thing and you didn't know, like, where to go with the conversation, or like anything big came up and you were like, oh man, like for you were almost like, oh, I don't know. Because I imagine, you're talking about cancer, or you're talking about, I'm sure there's a lot of really vulnerable,
Mhm.
amazing things shared, like goodness shared.
Yeah.
You were talking about those movies that you love, and I
Yeah.
just kept
Yeah.
thinking about your podcast is right there with it by sharing these amazing stories. So were you ever stumped or like taken aback by a share?
Um I mean, there are definitely shares that surprised you. Um I don't know if I've ever been taken aback by a share, as in I didn't really know where else to go. And if well, that has happened, but it's mostly because of my lack of ability, more than the surprisingness of their story. Usually, when they say something kind of surprising, I love that, because I try and dig into it and try and really like kind of figure out what's going on. I mean, I had one guy. His name is Rob Decker. Um, I had read up a little bit about his story, but having him tell it was just kind of impressive, because basically his story is, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? Well, I uh, came to terms with all of my BS and had to be honest with myself after surviving a suicide attempt, falling from a three-story building, breaking my back, and having my ex-girlfriend accuse me of rape and being arrested for that. So right, you have that and you're like, wow, where do I start first? Because for me, one thing I really try to do is pull out actionable items for my audience, and because that story is just a story unless we learn something from it.
Yeah.
And one thing I really liked about Rob's was his his decision to really be honest and talk about truth, and really say like, yeah, I was filling my life with bullcrap, and I was surrounding myself with people that weren't good, and I was just reflecting what I had on the inside on the outside of myself, and to really change my life, I had to change myself and my life, not just my life. So that was one example.
I love that. And same, getting to those actionable items. Were there any big gold nuggets that someone said that, someone who's going through a hard thing and they don't think that they can make it, they don't think they can endure, they don't think they can make it through? What was some of the best advice that your people gave? I know you talked about the
Right.
happening despite, but was there anything else juicy that they gave?
I hate to say it, but I mean, definitely juicy. But all of the action items, all of the advice is usually kind of like, oh yeah, that does totally make sense. And why didn't I think of that? Yeah, it's kind of obvious. I would say the number one thing that most of my guests have said, not maybe not most, but more than not, is to put together a good team, to build a great team, to put people around you. And you can see this in their stories as well. So many of my guests come from situations, or I'm guessing like many of your listeners, they really don't believe in themselves. They're at this level because that's where their mind is, and that's where they think they are. That's where their identity is. And a lot of these guests have people around them that at one time or another had this belief that, what are you doing down there? Like, come on up here, because that's where you really exist. I mean, I just interviewed Tommy Parker. He's a triple amputee. He's super cool. He was in the Marine Corps, but he stepped on an IED, blew off his legs, all of his fingers on his left hand except his thumb, and then, started recovering, started learning how to write again because he was left-handed. And then he became a drug addict because everyone was like, oh, you're okay. Like, you're in pain, you're an amputee. It's okay if you're a drug addict, And he crafted this identity for himself where he was proud of being a drug addict. And then one day he got caught and he was arrested. And his girlfriend at the time said to the judge, release him to me, I'll take care of him. And Tommy was like, wow, why? And it was because she believed that that's not who he was, that he could be someone more. And that was what allowed him to break that cycle of being a drug addict. So having people around you that are good for you and really believe in you more than you do, I think that is probably the biggest tip I could give to your audience.
That's so good. I think as human beings, we all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. We all want to be validated. Mm-hmm. And there's huge power in someone saying, I see you. You see you like here.
Yeah.
You see you at a certain level or a certain status or a certain whatever. I see the real you. I see you here.
Right.
I want better for you. Oh, yeah. That's so, so, so true. And I know in this landscape, I don't know about you if you can say the same, but my relationships, my friendships, like my marriage have gotten so much stronger this year. Mm-hmm. I think I took it for granted prior to this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my friends, I'll call them when I can. I'm building my business. I'm doing my thing. Like now I'm like, oh my God, I need people. And how much I even miss, just human interaction and hugging people and being with people. But has the same happened for you? Like, do you take your friendships and your, do you hold people a little tighter this year from what's been going on?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I've also been, again, lucky just because I've been having these conversations with people, and it's constant reminders of, people are going through way harder things than I am. And obviously you can't compare hard things because they're hard for everyone, but it's definitely been a good reminder. And also it's been a reminder to maybe not focus so much on relationships that don't reciprocate, and to really because there's always those relationships that we don't appreciate as much as we really should, like friends who are just always there and they don't ask for anything in return. This year has really opened my eyes as to the value of those kinds of people, and to help me appreciate and reciprocate more to them, rather than the people who maybe don't give me the time of day, but I think are really cool or have the nice toys or whatnot.
Yeah, value. You really start to question what does bring you joy and what does bring you value. And now maybe if you have more time than before, who do I want to spend this time with? Who do I want to give my time and attention to? I love that. That's so good. Question about your podcast. So for me, like, I get a lot of questions just about people who want to have a podcast, and a lot around the content and the structure. So for me, I completely free flow. And I do that by choice because I just love to kind of see. And I know you do too, but I believe you have a little bit more of a structure. Mine is like 100%. Hey, what do you want to talk about? Okay, let's get on and go. 100% free flow. You have a little bit more of a structure and a strategy. Would you mind just sharing that with the listeners if they're trying to figure out how they want to kind of flow with their shows when they have guests on or themselves?
Sure. So I guess about podcasting, before you even start recording, I would say, to make things easier, really figure out who you're trying to talk to, and then really figure out the things you want to talk about. I was lucky enough to kind of have a really good idea about what I wanted to talk about, and who I wanted to talk to was pretty good at the beginning, and then it shifted a little bit. So I talk to the right people. But once you have that, it becomes much easier to find topics, because first of all, if it's something that you really, really want to talk about, you're going to find things that you can talk about often. And they don't have to be as fleshed out as you think. You don't have to write it word for word, especially if you're doing like a solo cast. Just put a couple of bullet points that you're pretty certain you could rant on about. And, if that's what you want to talk about, that's what you talk about. As far as guests, uh, I've been really lucky. So with all the guests, and again, this, at the end of every show, I ask, what are some things I could have done better? How can I improve? Because when I first started, I was really, really bad. Like, I hate the fact that our first episodes are our first episodes, because that's the one that people usually go back to listen to first if they're going to binge your show. But that's also kind of the worst episodes you have. So I would really recommend you do that with your guests. Ask, like, what could I have done better? Also pay attention to other people who you listen to a lot, and figure out what they do really well. And then one thing I like to do is I take a lot of notes when I record. It might not seem like I'm paying attention, but I'm writing a bunch of notes down, because then if I do lose my train of thought, which happens more often than I'd like to admit, I can look down and see like this big word I've circled 3 times and be like, oh, that was something interesting they said. I want to dig into that. And it allows to kind of go back to some of the stories they've shared and pry open those pearls of wisdom that we can then hand to our audience.
I love that. And I think, Justin, just one of the things I really like about you is your humility. I'm pretty sure that your episodes do not suck the first couple ones. And I remember when you're like, no, I get it though. I'm the same. I go back. I'm at like episode 170. I think this is 177, and I go back to like 1 and 2 and 3. Oh, right.
Yeah.
You honor where you were at the time you were right there. But
Yes.
I remember when you had me on, I was like, hey, can I, reciprocity. I was like, I'd love to have you on mine. You're like, I'm just like a boring dude.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, I don't got anything interesting to say. And I was like, that's not true. I see you, and it's like this, you've shared so much wisdom and gems, not only from the guests that you have, but from just your own personal life. And I just love the humility and just the honesty and just who you are as a person. I felt so comfortable when I was on your show, and you just make people, you want to be around you. You make people feel really comfortable. That's a big responsibility to shoulder that. Hey, come and share with me the hardest thing you've ever been through. So I don't know if you give yourself enough credit for how good you facilitate hard conversations and vulnerable conversations. So I just want to say thank you for taking that on, because that's how, I always say we're always looking to the leader, a leader, to inspire us or tell us what to do. And they could be the person sitting next to you. They could be the person on the bus that you shared, got in the elevator with, or, we all have these stories. And like you said, we all have these hard things. And I just love that you provide such an amazing space to share those stories and the actionable. I'm all about the, like, what are we going to now do with this information? Let's inspire, but let's give people some steps to really get through. But I just love your humility and just who you are as a person, in putting out this goodness. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. That was very kind.
So is there anything we missed? Is there anything that you like gotta tell people that you looked back through your notes from having all these amazing guests on? I know you're a nerd, and I love that about you. Well, I am too, so I'm sure you got notes. Is there anything that we missed that we just gotta let them know, or did we cover it off? Are we good?
Actually, I do have one thing I would like to share.
Please.
Earlier you mentioned commitment, and I'm really happy that you did, because again, looking for similarities between the people and who they are in doing the hard things, I noticed that often, very often, these people in doing the hard things, they kind of put themselves in a position of inevitability. Have you heard that? I think it's by Robert Frost, where he says, sometimes the only way out is through. And often with these people who do these hard things, these high achievers, they put themselves in these situations, whether for better or worse, of the only way out is through inevitably. I can cite numerous examples of people who they got fired from their job, and so they had to do something else. One of my guests, he actually overdosed on NyQuil, and that kind of set him on his trajectory of really figuring out like, hey, my mental state isn't really where it should be. Um, or maybe it's just the fact of learning some knowledge that you can't unlearn, like
Mm.
realizing that, hey, I have been responsible for everything in my life that I have done up until now. Like once you know that, you can't unknow that, and then you have to act accordingly. So I would really like to encourage the audience to think about some of the things they would like to become, do, or have in their life, and think about the hard things that are in between them and getting those things, and then put themselves in a position of inevitability. And actually, funny enough, this podcast itself for me has been one of those positions of inevitability. Once you start a podcast and you start telling people about it, you're kind of chained to this thing.
You're in
And
it.
you have, yeah, exactly, you have to like live, and you have to put out content, but also you have to live the principles that you're trying to tell people to live. And
Yeah.
it's kind of nice because it's good reminders to me that whenever I have a relationship coach or someone who's good at negotiations, whenever I have a conversation with them, always afterwards I'll be like, I'll go talk to my wife and be like, hey, I just had this talk with a guy who's all about relationships. I need to be better with my relationship with you. Or and that's just one example.
Is your wife like, oh God, who are you putting on podcast this week right now?
Yeah.
Oh.
She's super supportive, luckily. But I would just definitely recommend you think about the hard things that are in between you and where you want to be, and then kind of put yourself, I mean, strategically, don't go quit your job today, but put yourself in a position of inevitability where you have to push through. Because like Lisa said, you're more resourceful than you think. All of us, we have so many resources at our disposal that we don't even, we take for granted, but we can do so much more than we really think.
I love that. I was talking to a podcasting like expert, and she was saying, oh, you have 174 shows. Like, that's amazing. And she was saying most podcasts don't make it past 100 shows.
Yeah.
That people either it's too much work or they're not consistent enough, and you're right. I'm always of the same mindset as you. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And then if there's a nugget of wisdom or something, that's self-reflection of how am I going to get better, like that's the cool part of being able to talk to so many interesting people.
Yeah.
Is that not only it's like that full circle, not only are you putting it out into the world, but you're taking it in and thinking, how am I going to change that in my life? Huge accountability when you dive into these conversations. And I love that you talked about that space between where you are now and where you want to be, and putting yourself right there. And it's like every day doing those hard things and taking that step by step to get there. Dr. Ben Hardy shared, I was able to see him on a mastermind call, and he said the problem a lot of times is that we talk about ourselves in the past. We don't talk about in the future that we're like, I was a former nurse, or I was a former this, or I'm currently an SEO specialist.
Right.
Not, I facilitate amazing conversations on the Hard Thing podcast. And, I have no greater joy in life than sharing this goodness and getting better every day. And, we talk about where we were or where we currently are instead of where we want to be and where we're going.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought that up for people, because now, if you haven't been doing it, now especially as we get towards the end of a year and we're going to be starting another year, now is such a good time to figure out where you want to be and where that space is and what things you're going to commit to. Right? Not what sounds good, not what you'd like to do, not what you'd maybe do, what you're going to commit to. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, so good. It's so true.
So good. Justin, thank you so much for being here with me and taking this time with me. Just So good. I can't believe those words even came out of your mouth, that you're like, I got nothing good to share. So, so, so good. And
Thank you.
so you have no plans of stopping this Hard Thing podcast anytime soon.
No, ma'am.
So, listeners, if you've got a good hard thing that you want to talk about, Justin's your guy. I highly recommend that you tune in to his podcast. It is so good. Share it with everyone you know. How can they find you, Justin? How can they reach you? How can they find all your stuff?
Sure. Well, I have the hardthingpodcast.com, which is my website. I'm on basically all of the major directories, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or I don't think they call it that anymore, but just search for the Hard Thing Podcast. What I'd really like is just, reach out to me on social media and talk to me about the hard things you're doing. I'd love to start that conversation, see what you're up to. Again, just a Hard Thing Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Parlor, if you guys are into that. But so that's it.
Awesome. Amazing. And don't worry if you were driving or you've got like groceries in your hands, or I will put all of that information in the show notes. Justin, again, thank you so much for being here with me. You are amazing. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope this gave you some inspiration, and go back to this, because it's not like you go through one hard thing and then you're like, okay, tick that off. I'm done now. I'll never go through another hard thing in my life. Use this podcast as a resource to come back to when you are in the middle of a hard thing. Use this to get you through. Use this as a resource. Listen to Justin. Tune into his podcast. You are not alone. Justin talked about have that team, have those people around you. And if you're like, damn, I don't know if I have those, this is a great place to start. So glad that you're here. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you next time on The Lisa Pezik Show.